Welcome back, my friends, to the third and final hour of this week's Mozart to Motörhead show. This is John Hammel, your host. I'm with my special guest, Bud Tristano. Bud.
Yes.
I have a question for you. The first hour, we've listened to Primal Elegance, your CD with Connie Crothers. And now we're going to listen to your most recent CD, Lenapewiattuck, River of the Lenape, that you made with Kazzrie Jaxen on piano. Can you give me a little bit of insight into this record? Now, you mentioned that you recorded the album with Connie in her apartment in New York.
Right.
And this one was recorded, though, at a studio?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, there's a studio really close to where she lives. She lives in Sullivan County in New York.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be called Big Twig Studios, and the engineer-owner is Dana Duke. And yeah, we recorded there 4 different times, 4 sessions over a span of... Our first recording was 2007, and then 2013 was our last session there. So we also had quite a bit of material to sift through.
And was this also a project of just pure creative improvisation? Somebody came up with the musical?
The very last track, we spent a couple hours doing multi-track stuff. Mm-hmm. So we would improvise the first stretch and then put the headphones on, and Dana would play it back, and we'd improvise over that. And we did about 3 passes. But that's the last track only. All the others are just straight free improv.
Wow. Nice. I love it.
And then we also got a local fellow to get some, for that last track, to get some bird sounds from around that area, from that river. So
now, we ended the second hour with a track that you recorded, I think you said back in the early 70s.
No, that was recorded around 1990.
Oh, okay. But that was recorded around where you live, where you recorded bird sounds and then you improvised around it. So there seems to be a theme here of nature sounds. Tell me a little bit about that. What is your involvement and interest in trying to create music in conjunction with your natural environment?
Yeah, well, started out this little place in Pennsylvania, is all the way on the western side of Pennsylvania. Our maternal grandmother had a camp here, and our mom would send us out here in the summers. So the first summer I was about 5, and as soon as I set foot on this spot, there was this instant bond, like I became an instant outdoorsman, nature freak, naturalist. It just, like, it was instant, and it just felt like I'm not so high on reincarnation anymore as like a concept, but it just felt like I must have been an Indian here in another life. The connection was that deep.
Wow.
So I just totally bonded with nature and the sounds of nature and just being outdoors all the time.
And were you initially raised in an urban environment?
Yeah. So probably when I was 5 we'd come out here every summer until we finished 6th grade in New Jersey, and then our mother moved us out here permanently. So, like, my high school years, we lived in the woods in the middle. Back then, this was like the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Now it's not so much, which is I'm forever the Indian with the tear rolling down the cheek.
Yeah.
That is me. Iron Eyes Cody lives through me.
Love it.
Yeah. Here's another thing. I also have a YouTube channel, which I originally started like just for my music, but it ended up having more of my wildlife videos on there. So it's like I wanted to be Eddie Van Halen, but I turned into Marlon Perkins.
That's a great quote. I wanted to be Eddie Van Halen. You mentioned that on your website. You may have mentioned that. You mentioned him as an influence in the music that you love. I think that was an email to me, actually, where you said your aspiration as a youth was to be an Eddie Van Halen type guitarist. And
Right.
here you are doing what you're doing now, which is great. Eddie, I remember Van Halen. Unfortunately, he's become sort of a, in critics' minds, his music has become a cliche, or
Uh-huh.
and I hate that when that happens.
Yeah.
When you have these shifts, this gestalt, where things shift perspective about people. Because I remember distinctly when he first came out, he was mind blowing.
Yeah, he was.
Nobody was doing the stuff he was doing. His fluidity, his creativity, his improvisational abilities, his technique. Nobody was doing it. In a sense, it was to me, the most exciting thing I had heard on guitar since I first heard Hendrix. And I remember what a transformative experience that was. I think I was all of 14 or 15 years old. Now, let me see. I'll figure this out. The first album came out in '67, so I must have been close to. I was either 15 or 16. I think it was before my 16th birthday that summer. And we knocked on this guy's house, and he was renting a house in our Lake community. He was from California. And I remember him blowing my mind. He had a little General Electric like record player that you'd pull down, and the turntable would come down, and the speakers were attached. There was a plastic unit. And he goes, he must have been in his early 20s, and he wanted to, he was asking us about music, what we liked, and he goes, have you ever heard this guy? And that day, he played for us Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experienced? And Tim Buckley's Goodbye and Hello.
Uh-huh.
Both of those records. And that was the first time my mind had been opened up, really opened up to how amazing music could be. It expanded it, and from that point on, forget it. I was lost. Here I am years later. I'm an old man. I have tens of thousands of records, and I just can't stop searching for the new thing all the time and being excited,
Right.
constantly being excited by music. And I think that's the kinship that I have felt with you, just emailing you and going to your website and seeing your influence. And I said, oh my God, he's showing the music he likes and the records he loves and the artist. And it's like, this is Mozart the Motörhead. This is it. This is a show. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, I'm beginning to get overexcited and jabbering away, and we should play something here from this record with Kazzrie Jaxen. It's broken up into sections, which is really interesting, like Vivaldi's Four Seasons. It has a prologue. Yeah, it has a prologue and an epilogue, and it broken up into winter, spring, summer, and autumn. Gosh. Let's see, we are actually in winter right now. So why don't I'm going to do something which I love to do, and I don't mind doing it, and people who are faithful listeners of the Mozart to Motörhead show don't have a problem with it. Why don't we do you want to play the winter section, the whole section?
Sure.
Breath of the North, Long Dark Nights, and Glacier. Before we do, it's not that long, folks. It's about 11, 12 minutes, which is nothing compared to some of the, I've played Machine Gun by Peter Bronsman on the show, and that takes up a whole hour.
Hey, you can play Thick as a Brick.
Yeah, Thick as a Brick. I don't want to get going. I'm going to get sidetracked. You hit my musical excitation button. I'm a big Jethro Tull fan also.
All right.
Tell us a little bit about Winter, Breath of the North, Long Dark Nights, and Glacier before we play it.
Okay, well, when I started recording with Kazzrie, a big part of the experience was she was really close to the Delaware River, and we would go take nature walks by this river. In the summer, we'd swim in the river, and it just it suggested to us that it was about when you're walking along this river, you just feel what it must have been like. Here's that recurring theme when the Indians had it all to themselves, before the Europeans came. And so we just started to feel what that must have been like. And over the course of the years of recording, it kind of suggested this format of prologue and epilogue and seasons. So, and these tracks just felt like winter tracks once we sifted through all the stuff that we had.
Okay, here we go. This is the winter section of Lenapewiattuck, Bud Tristano, and Kazzrie Jaxen. Kazzrie Jaxen on piano, Bud Tristano on guitar. Breath of the North, Long Dark Nights, and Glacier. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Wonderful stuff. That was the winter, I can only call it a suite, Breath of the North, Long Dark Nights, and Glacier from Lenapewiattuck, River of the Lenape, Bud Tristano and Kazzrie Jaxen. Bud, why did you break it up into seasons?
It just kind of suggested itself over time. And by the way, that album that's on my website, that Wood Thrush Suite came from, I had designed that the same way. I didn't put the seasons
Yeah.
in, on the album cover. But yeah, Peace and Claw, which is the name of that free downloadable album, it was laid out the very same way in seasons, because I wanted to follow the seasons of a year at my camp. So that was I had already done that before. And it just seemed like a natural thing to do it again with Kazzrie, because we were so into the river, the nature of the river, the natural history of it.
You mentioned that you would go for walks along the river and swim in the river. And I remember doing that with a friend of mine. His parents owned a cabin on the Delaware River. And to be honest with you, it was somewhere in Pennsylvania. And I don't remember exactly where, but I do remember we went up there a couple of summers, several times each summer. And it really, really was a joy jumping in that river. Because, it was like our cabin was right on the banks of the river. And we would swim out to some rocks and we'd be diving in and out of the rushing water off of the rocks. And in retrospect, I think about it, and I remember that it was fairly deep, and the water looked dark. It was dark. And we used to jump off those rocks and dive in all the time. And it didn't occur to me until years later. We had no idea if there were rocks under that water.
Wow.
We were just jumping in. We were having a great time.
Right.
And we weren't kids. We must have been in our early 20s at that point. Should have known better, didn't. And it's like, yes. I survived another silly aspect of my youth. How did that happen? Your website is budtristanomusic.com.
No, it's just budtristano.com.
Oh, not music.
No, that might be one of my sub-pages.
Got it. All right, I'm sorry about that. And thanks for the correction. budtristano.com. So it's even easier to remember, folks.
Yep.
And it's Peace and Qua is the name of the free downloadable CD, and it's all nature sounds recorded and improvised over by Bud Tristano between 1971 and 1997. But back to this album with Kazzrie. What I find a little interesting with this, maybe because it was recorded in a studio, the piano presence is a little more upfront. It seems like in her conversation, Connie, to me, this is only my perception, correct me if I'm wrong,
Okay.
to me, it seemed like Connie supported you more in your ideas. She had a conversation with the ideas that you were promulgating to your guitar work. But Kazzrie seems to be, on this record, more of an active participant in the conversation, like not only supporting you, but saying, oh, that's really neat, Bud. How about this idea? What do you think of this? This seems to be more of an ebb and flow.
Well, you know what I think you're hearing is between recording with Connie and then with Kazzrie, I had done a lot more free improvisation after we did Primal Elegance, so I had more experience with that one playing. So I was able, there was a lot of growth.
Yeah.
Kazzrie could respond to that I didn't have when I played with Connie. I was still, my inner guitar hero would not die.
Yeah. Was it just one or several inner guitar heroes?
Well, like whatever I would have been if I would have gone down that path. I guess I probably dodged a bullet. And also I'd be deaf by now if I'd have gone, because I used to love playing loud. But yeah, anyway, so after we recorded Primal Elegance, I spent a lot of time in New York City playing free improvisation with all the like Connie students and associates and all kinds of instruments. And so I had a lot more experience to bring to the table by the time I did the project with Kazzrie. So it's more me than...
Yeah. Now, when you would play in New York, would you play at small clubs? Would you play at people's lofts, apartments, things like that?
Yeah, all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
Connie actually had the loft when she had to leave Manhattan. She had a loft in Brooklyn that she actually hosted free concerts. Well, not always free, but hosted concerts and jam sessions all the time.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about this record, Lenapewiattuck. You have an epilogue and a prologue. You mentioned the epilogue, but
the epilogue, it kind of reflects some of the liner notes, and we don't really have time to like read all the liner notes. But in Kazzrie's research, she did a lot of research about the Lenape Indians, and she had stumbled on this concept called the prophecy of the fourth crow, which some Lenapes reject it, but we really like the idea that basically the epilogue is supposed to be like the fourth crow coming home to roost, in a sense where not just the original Americans, the American Indian, and like the descendants of the European invaders, we're all going to work together to restore this land and bring back the natural beauty of whatever natural areas are left.
And that's the prophecy of the fourth crow, the prologue?
Well, I'll just read it. This is a quote by someone who calls himself Chief Red Hawk.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it says. We now know that the first crow was the Lenape before the coming of the Europeans. The second crow symbolized the death and destruction of our culture. The third crow was our people going underground and hiding. The fourth crow was the Lenape becoming caretakers again and working with everybody to restore this land. So that epilogue is like, not the eagle has landed, but the fourth crow has landed.
Ah.
Like a vision of hope that we can all, whatever natural areas are left, not just the Delaware River, but we can restore as much of it as possible. And that's my take on it. Kazzrie would probably come up with something different.
Do we want to play the epilogue then, the Lenapewiattuck?
If you want, there's a YouTube. I did make a YouTube video for it.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah, that's the only video I've made so far.
Well, why don't we then let that go for... We urge you. We don't advise you. We urge you to go seek out that YouTube video. And you can just go to YouTube and put in your name, Bud Tristano, and it would probably...
It should come up.
It should pop up. Instead, there's a longer track. Now, this is something that my listeners really, really like. I know they do. Don't you? Please. I like long tracks. I like the track that you dedicated. I like all the tracks. Ceremony, Song for the River of Time, which is a long track you've dedicated to Connie Crothers.
Yeah. Yeah, sadly, we lost her a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's a different world without her in it.
Yeah, she seemed to be another person. I mentioned someone, another artist that I have featured on my show a few times over the years, Diane Mozart, who I've always referred to as Mother Jazz, because she cares as much, if not more, in a lot of ways about promoting the music and other artists than herself. It's a sort of selfless sort of musical love. Connie Crothers certainly embodied that concept also. Everybody I've ever met who knew her pointed that out to me. So why don't we listen to this? It's a longer track. It's called Ceremony. It's part of it's the summer section of Lenapewiattuck Song for the River of Time, dedicated to Connie Crothers, featuring Kazzrie Jaxen on piano and Bud Tristano on guitar. And we will just let that, what's the word I'm thinking of? Let it rip.
We roll on.
What a great, amazing piece.
Thank you very much.
Oh, God. I love it. That was Ceremony's Song for the River of Time, dedicated to Connie Crothers, featuring Kazzrie Jaxen on piano, Bud Tristano on guitar. Bud, unbelievably, the time has flown. We are getting towards the end of our second and final hour together, third hour of this week's Mozart to Motörhead show. Before we go, if we could spend just a little bit of time, one more track I wanted to play. We should talk about Vision Quest. Before we go, let's give the people your website again, which is simply budtristano.com. Very easy. Very easy. budtristano.com to find out all you need to know and more about today's guest artist, guitarist Bud Tristano. He's a real Mozart to Motörheadian, so I think you'll have a good time perusing his site. I have one question real quick, if you wanted to answer, and I asked this question of some people. miss the opportunity to ask it of most. And it's a great question. I think it's an important question. What is it that made you want to be an artist, a creative person, and to get it out there? I know that's a tough question to...
Well, I think we're actually born that way. We have no choice. If we don't... To me, a work of art is like a finite expression of infinity.
Mm-hmm.
And if we aren't able to express ourselves like in space-time, we have to go back to infinity. So, meaning, if we don't create, we'll just die. We'll die inside. We just have to do it. We're born this way.
Yeah. Did you have a feeling when you were younger of feeling different than other peers? Like your perspective, how you viewed things? Did you feel like Valentine Smith in Robert A. Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land?
I don't know, but I sort of feel like Alfred E. Newman today. But I think my goal is, rather than to be the Alfred E. Newman of the guitar, I'm going to be the Jackson Pollock of the guitar. That's the direction I'm headed.
That's
but
great.
Actually, to answer your question, when I was really little, our father created an environment for kids to grow up as artists. I think he had that vision of he would have never said, oh, you got to study the piano because I played the piano. He just created this environment that would nurture a budding artist.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it was not meant to be because by the time I was 4, they split. So we didn't really get to grow up in that environment. But that, we're born that way, but then I was born into an environment where it was nurtured that your first years, which make an impression on you, don't they?
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Listen, we have time for one more track, our last track.
All right.
Our last track here. I want to thank you so much for being a guest on this show today. It's been
I want to thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. As soon as I heard your music, I said I don't do a lot of interviews since I moved out of the state and I'm out here in the Mojave Desert. But every once in a while, I get struck by somebody's music and their creativity, and I say, well, we have to talk about this. Tell us a little bit about the last track we're going to listen to, Vision Quest.
Okay, well, it's dedicated to my older half-brother who also passed away a couple years ago. I didn't actually meet him till I was 38. That's Steve Tristano. And that was really intense in itself because you hear about this half-sibling that you have all your life and you think you're never going to meet him. And then one day you're face-to-face with him and there's no way to describe what that feels like because blood is thicker than water. He actually wrote us a letter saying that he had already dropped the half, like he wasn't calling us our half-siblings.
Uh-huh.
But I still had my doubts, but as soon as I met him face-to-face, the half just went poof. Just evaporated.
Oh, that's great. And this last track we're going to listen to is part of the autumn section of Lenapewiattuck, featuring Bud Tristano on guitar, Kazzrie Jaxen on piano, Vision Quest dedicated to Steve Tristano. That will end our show. I want to thank you again for being a guest on this week's Mozart to Motörhead show. Remind the listeners these shows are archived at archive.org on the worldwide internet. Here is Vision Quest.